A very good afternoon, one and all. Thank you so much for joining via Zoom as well as YouTube in today's NParks Spotlight session. My name is Jayashree from the National Biodiversity Center at National Parks Board. This weekend, we launched the 10th edition of Festival of Biodiversity. This is NParks' yearly celebration of our natural heritage in collaboration with the Biodiversity Roundtable. There are various online as well as on-site activities that are being organized as part of this year's Festival of Biodiversity. Do visit the website to find out how you can all participate in the various fun activities that are tailored to meet everyone within your family and friends group. If you happen to be around Singapore Botanic Gardens, do visit the exhibits that are currently available at the Botany Center. This is the overview of today's program, which will be focusing on making Singapore climate resilient as we embark on the journey of city in nature, on how we use nature-based solutions in making Singapore climate resilient. We have two speakers today from the National Parks Board, Jonathan Tan and Zestin Soh, who will be sharing about the various frameworks and strategies that are being employed. At any point during the session, if you have questions, please send them as a private message via the Zoom chat group, and we will try to address as much as possible towards the end of the session. Over to Jonathan and Zestin for the session, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, I'm Zestin. Today, Jonathan and I will be sharing about how Singapore's efforts to become a city in nature will strengthen our country's resilience in the face of climate change. But before we dive deeper into today's topic, we would like to find out what our viewers in the audience think about climate change and its impacts. We have prepared an online quiz with 2 questions that you can participate in. So do use your mobile phone to scan the QR code shown on the screen, or if you're using a computer, to visit the Menti link and input the code shown below. We'll give everyone some time to join the session. All right, we're getting some responses. Thanks for participating. Okay, so our first question is, what do you think are some of the greatest threats of Singapore to Singapore from climate change? So we're getting a range of different answers. In the middle, we can see the main threat that people are mentioning has to do with rising sea levels and flooding, extreme weather conditions. Yep, so these are major impacts that are particularly important for us as a low-lying and small island city. There's another, I see some things on hot weather. So Singapore is already very hot, and you can imagine that it becomes even hotter due to the effects of climate change. I see habitat loss. Yeah, so climate change not only impacts human societies, but also threatens our biodiversity. Okay, I think we'll stop there. I think all these different impacts illustrate just the variety of different ways that climate change can threaten both our society as well as our natural biosphere. Now that we've thought a bit about some of the impacts of climate change, I want you to perhaps share with us what you think Singapore needs to do to adapt to climate change. So I have a few seconds to think about it. Again, you can input more than one response. Okay, the first few responses coming up are to do with planting of trees. Great. We'll definitely be talking a lot more about that during our session. I see a few responses to do with what individuals can do, reducing the amount of plastic we use, reducing our pollution, reducing carbon emissions. And some of these can also be done by companies as well. Education, that's really important, sharing with the wider community the importance of the impacts of climate change, as well as the importance of individual efforts, as well as companies' efforts and the whole nation efforts actually to adapting and mitigating the impacts of climate change. And recycling also related to less wastage. Great. All right. Thanks everyone for participating. I think we'll stop here. Okay. So moving back to the talk proper, as we've seen from the very first question, climate change is a global crisis with a variety of different impacts that are already being felt today. These impacts include warmer temperatures that is made even worse in built-up areas of cities due to the urban heat island effect. Storm events are becoming more frequent and intense, and sea levels are rising. And as mentioned, these impacts are all particularly important for a small low-lying island city like Singapore. And they not only impact our society, they also threaten our native biodiversity. And hence it's crucial that we prepare Singapore for climate change. And in response to these climate challenges, the government launched the Singapore Green Plan 2030 early this year. The Green Plan is a whole-of-nation movement to advance sustainable development and create a green, livable, and sustainable home for Singaporeans. A key pillar of the Singapore Green Plan is the vision to transform Singapore into a city in nature. City in nature is about infusing greenery into our living environment and extending nature throughout our island. And some of the initiatives and targets under City in Nature include planting 1 million trees in partnership with the community, intensifying nature in our gardens and parks, and expanding our nature park network. Greening in Singapore really isn't new. There's been over 50 years of greening effort in Singapore. And City in Nature is about growing this work further by applying more nature-based solutions to help us achieve climate resilience, ecological resilience, and social resilience. So today's webinar will be specifically about how City in Nature contributes to climate resilience. And as shown on this slide, NParks has 4 key strategies under City in Nature that leverage on science-based and nature-based solutions, science-based approaches and nature-based solutions to tackle the impacts of climate change. So these 4 strategies include our greening, flood resilient design, ecosystem enhancement and restoration, and biosurveillance. And we'll be going through each of these strategies in more detail. But before I go further into these 4 strategies, I'd like to explain what nature-based solutions are. So as illustrated in this diagram by the IUCN, nature-based solutions include any actions involved in protecting, sustainably managing, or restoring ecosystems to address societal challenges. So these challenges might be those caused by climate change, for instance. And at the same time, at the bottom of this diagram, as you can see, they help to not only bring about human well-being benefits to human well-being, but also benefits to biodiversity. So potentially nature-based solutions are really great if applied correctly, because they can not only help to address climate change impacts, but also help to conserve our native biodiversity. And we'll be touching on a variety of different nature-based solutions through this webinar. Now back to the 4 strategies, the first of which is greening, extending, restoring, and intensifying nature in our living environment. So our greening effort can be considered a nature-based solution to mitigating climate change and other urban challenges. So first, greening enhances our climate resilience as it helps regulate temperatures through evapotranspiration and shade provision. Greening also helps improve air and water quality, and also helps to sequester carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Second, greening strengthens our biodiversity by providing habitats for wildlife and enhancing ecological connectivity. This increases the capacity of our ecosystems to withstand and recover from stress caused by climate change. Last but not least, greenery also brings about social benefits, improving our mental and physical well-being. As mentioned earlier, one of the climate threats Singapore is facing is rising temperatures. And as shown in this heat map of Singapore, this is especially the case for built-up areas, which are more susceptible to the urban heat island effect. And you've probably noticed this yourself. You can feel a lot hotter walking among buildings compared to under the cool of a forest, or being in the cool of a forest. And so greening these areas is important to cool down these urban areas. And thus, we've been partnering the community in tree planting island-wide through the 1 Million Trees movement under City in Nature. We have planted over 240,000 trees together with our community partners in the process, and you can join us in this effort. So industrial estates are actually one example of highly built up areas in Singapore. And so we are intensifying the greening here to help cool the area, while also creating a more beautiful and livable working environment here. Our target is to plant 170,000 more trees by 2030 in industrial estates, together with partners and the community. And at the same time, research will also be done here in conjunction with this effort. And the research will involve the use of sensors to help monitor the effort. So some photos. Here's an example of multi-tiered tree planting along the roads of Jurong Island. And these are similar examples of tree planting in the industrial areas throughout Jurong. And these plantings mimic the structure of natural forests to support native biodiversity, such as butterflies and birds, and comprise more vegetation to help cool the area. Finally, apart from greening at the ground level, it's also crucial to be greening up our buildings, as this helps to mitigate warming temperatures in urban areas. And our aim here is to increase skyrise greenery in Singapore from 133 hectares to 200 hectares by 2030. So in addition to building our climate resilience by reducing surface temperatures, skyrise greenery can also help to reduce the energy needed to cool down our buildings. It can also help to mitigate noise, reduce runoff, and create habitats for biodiversity in the built environment, and also beautifies our spaces and provides more communal spaces for the community to bond together. Now, Jonathan will be bringing you through our remaining strategies, starting with flood resilient design.
Thanks, Zestin. So I'll be talking about our second to fourth strategies for building climate resilience, and this one is flood resilient design. So what does this actually mean? Okay, so as Zestin mentioned earlier, Singapore has increased flood risk because of climate change, partly because there'll be more frequent and more intense rainfall expected, and at the same time, sea levels will rise. So just to give a brief overview of how our flood resilience systems traditionally work, you have rain that falls on urban developments, and because urban areas tend to be concrete, this rain then runs off and it needs to find its way to the sea. So how it gets there is that it goes through a drainage system and eventually into the sea. But if, let's say, it's high tide and sea levels have risen, there may be a need to build a tidal gate to keep this higher sea level out and then pump the remaining stormwater out using a pumping station. So traditional engineering solutions are able to accomplish some of this. Singapore has been using many of these for many decades. For example, detention tanks. So the aim of detention tanks is to slow down the runoff that come from your urban areas so that your drainage systems aren't overloaded. For the drainage systems, we have been consistently widening our drains so that they can hold more water and at the same time transport water away from areas that might be flooded even quicker. And of course, we also have a number of tidal gates and pumping stations around the island. For instance, Marina Barrage, which is able to double up in function by creating a freshwater reservoir. So traditional solutions are able to work and they have served us well. But with climate change, we are likely to face increased challenges and we want to find new ways of tackling them. So this is where nature-based solutions come in. And nature-based solutions are useful alternatives, not necessarily because they are more effective in alleviating flooding, but also because they can fulfill this function and yet provide additional functions. So for example, you see Bishan Ang Mo Kio Park at the bottom left. It's able to fulfill the same flood resilience function as a traditional concrete drain, because it can hold surface runoff from surrounding areas and reduce the risk of flooding in the HDB estates adjacent to it. But at the same time, it provides the additional function of recreational space, because it's a parkland that people can use when there isn't storm. And it can also support biodiversity. For instance, the famous Bishan family of smooth-coated otters. On the coastal side, besides traditional methods like seawalls to prevent coastal erosion, we can also tap on natural ecosystems like mangroves. And mangrove trees are able to help hold the soil together to defend the coast against coastal erosion. At the same time, they have other functions such as sequestering carbon inside their very deep and carbon-rich soils, and they are rich habitats for wildlife ranging from shorebirds to fish to even crocodiles. And nature-based solutions really have been something that NParks has been working on for many, many years with other government agencies. You see, for instance, these vegetated swales and biotopes along the Kallang River in Bishan Park. Not only do they help to carry water away from flood-prone areas into the river, they are able to cleanse the water as it goes in, improving the water quality of our reservoirs. Where there are space limitations and we aren't able to do full naturalization, we can come up with more creative nature-based solutions. For instance, the greening up of canal walls, or even the construction of floating wetlands. So while these greenery may not contribute directly to flood resilience, they allow the entire system to now become multifunctional and cause the whole waterway to double up as a recreational space and also habitat for biodiversity. And this also extends to our coastal areas. So on the left, you have examples of nature-based solutions, which are so-called hard eco-engineering, where the main coastal protection function is provided by an engineered structure of concrete, but we are able to modify the surface of it so that biodiversity can also flourish. In the middle, you have hybrid eco-engineering solutions. So this is where opportunity arises. We can actually design our coastal protection structures to integrate natural elements such as corals and mangroves into the very structure of our coastal protection. And all the way on the right-hand side, we have fully natural nature-based solutions that involve restoring entire ecosystems such as mangroves and seagrass meadows to fulfill different kinds of functions. And as I mentioned earlier, this is not new. NParks has been trialing many of these nature-based solutions at various places. For example, in Bishan Ang Mo Kio Park, but also at other places like Pulau Tekong. This is an example of a hybrid rock mangrove revetment that was done in 2010. And we are constantly learning from past pilot examples so that we can do even better. At the same time, we are funding new research, such as the Marine Climate Change Science Program. So this $25 million program aims to do research in 3 big areas of marine science, i.e. blue carbon, which means the sequestration of carbon through marine ecosystems such as mangroves and seagrasses. Also in looking at ecological resilience, basically how well our native coastal ecosystems will be able to stand up to impacts of climate change. And also at eco-engineering. In other words, figuring out how we can use these native ecosystems to create engineered coastlines that are at the same time tightly integrated with biodiversity. And this will help us address the impacts of climate change on our coastal and marine environment all around Singapore. Our third strategy is to enhance and restore our existing ecosystems throughout our parks. One big part of ecosystem restoration involves the species recovery program. So the species recovery program takes a look at native species which are endemic, meaning found only in Singapore, rare or threatened, meaning that they might be in danger of going extinct if intervention isn't done. And we do this through, for example, captive breeding and then reintroducing them into selected sites, or trying to better understand and study their biology so we can figure out how we can enhance their existing habitats and conserve habitat patches that are important for them. So the idea here isn't just to save a particular species for the sake of it, we also hope to build the overall resilience of our native biodiversity to climate change impacts, so that going forward, this is something that our children and children's children can inherit. And NParks targets to conserve 100 plant and 60 animal species under this program by 2030. We're currently about 80% of the way. Moving beyond just the species level, we also look at the ecosystem level. So you may not know this, but Singapore actually has other terrestrial ecosystems besides our tropical rainforests. We have freshwater swamp forests, which are a kind of forests that are constantly flooded because of their low-lying nature. And many of these forests and streams actually hold very rare species that are found nowhere else in our country. But at the same time, these ecosystems are fragile because they may be impacted by rising temperatures and changing rainfall patterns, which will affect how much water is able to be retained by these systems. Many of them have also been affected by human impact, and we want to better understand how we can restore them. In order to do this, we first need to understand where they are, and we've actually done a massive mapping project to map out many of these native forest streams so that we can understand each of them as a system and do more further research to understand how we can restore them and increase their resilience to possible climate change impacts. Okay, moving on to our daily parks. So what I mentioned earlier were interventions that are happening in more natural areas such as our nature reserves. But we also want to bring ecosystem enhancement into neighborhood parks so that a greater number of people can enjoy them. And the idea is to enhance habitats in various kinds of parks to improve overall climate resilience, not just for ecosystems, but also for people, so that we have more places that we can visit. The goal here is to first plan out for each individual park what we want to see before we move on to implementing these efforts, and afterwards to maximize the value through programming, i.e. Working with community partners to ensure that people can make use of these places as a recreational space. So one example is in Jurong Lake Garden. So historically, Jurong used to have a lot of freshwater swamp forests, but these were subsequently lost as a result of development. What we've done is that we have converted a concrete canal that used to be here into a series of naturalized waterways. So these are able to double up as floodplains for capturing flood water, and at the same time as habitat for wildlife. We also modified the land to create areas of flooded wetland, which have now become habitat for a diverse array of waterbirds. And as you can see at the bottom right, we have also built things like boardwalks so that people can enjoy these habitats up close. Besides just parks, we are also doing rewilding along a whole array of different kinds of land types. So for example, along some of our roadsides, we are currently trialing letting this greenery establish naturally. So instead of constantly doing grass cutting, we let biodiversity attracting shrubs grow naturally and bringing a greater variety of birds, butterflies, and bees into the area. We are rolling this out in parks and along 32 different stretches of nature ways by the year 2023. So nature ways are basically roads where we have done a multi-tiered planting. And in this case, we are also allowing the native vegetation to grow right on its own without constant pruning. So our fourth strategy for making sure we are climate resilient is biosurveillance. So this is essentially a science-based approach to keep us safe from possible diseases that may come in because of climate change. So as the global temperatures become warmer, in Singapore, we may experience new disease vectors, such as, for instance, new species of insect that might carry other kinds of diseases not previously known in Singapore. And the fact that there are now milder winters overseas could change the migratory patterns of things like migratory birds that might bring in new kinds of zoonotic diseases. With warmer surface waters, bacteria may grow better inside our native freshwater ecosystems. Looking also at the increased frequency of extreme rainfall, with more intense wet seasons, vectors such as mosquitoes may actually survive longer because of a greater breeding period, and there may be even more stagnant puddles that they can start breeding in. On the flip side, with erratic rainfall and longer dry seasons, mosquitoes, for example, might actually start moving further and further, and thus cause a greater geographical spread of different kinds of diseases. And all this is part of a larger pattern of climate change upsetting the balance in our urban ecosystem and therefore causing increased rates of disease. So what NParks is doing is that we are constantly working in the background to identify and monitor new biosecurity threats that may appear. So this involves, for example, scanning and early detection of diseases in animals. So this means that we actually will examine different kinds of wildlife to look out for possible viruses or bacteria that have a possibility of jumping over to humans. We also want to work together with other government agencies to better manage different kinds of disease hosts and vectors, such as mosquitoes, sandflies, and ticks, and also create greater public awareness for people to understand how they can better protect themselves against the risk of these diseases. Okay, so I'd also like to speak a bit more about some of the new nature-based solutions that we've are going to implement in the next year or two. And also some background about how we learned from previous examples in order to move on to what we are coming up with now. So this will be at 3 different sites. The first example is from Pulau Tekong, the second from Kranji Coastal Nature Park, and the final one from Pulau Ubin. So as I alluded to briefly earlier, back in 2010, NParks actually trialed a pilot of nature-based solutions at Pulau Tekong. So Tekong actually has a patch of very pristine mangrove forest in the northeast, which remains one of the richest and most species diverse mangrove forests in all of Singapore. However, because of an increase in shipping traffic, these mangrove forests were actually eroding away, and some of the mature trees were even toppling over. So NParks actually moved in to intervene, but we wanted to ensure that it was done in a way that allowed nature to regenerate rather than to end up creating a sterile, hard seawall. So what we did was we built a low rock revetment together with mud-filled geobags. So this structure was able to absorb wave energy and protect the mangrove behind from erosion, but at the same time allow sediments to accumulate in the gaps between the rocks. This also meant that new mangrove saplings could actually settle in those gaps and regenerate the mangrove forest. We also aim to help speed up this natural regeneration by doing mangrove planting. So you can see over here, there's this layer of gray rocks, and that's where a number of many small mangrove saplings have been planted in biodegradable planter rings. And you can see the mature mangrove forest is well protected behind it. So subsequently, we actually learned from the Tekong project to better improve our designs. And just recently, we implemented a new kind of a hybrid mangrove revetment at Kranji Coastal Nature Park. So this is a buffer park for Sungei Buloh Wetland Reserve, which has the largest patch of mangroves on mainland Singapore. But similar to Tekong, it was suffering from erosion issues. Erosion that was caused more by human activity rather than natural processes that were pushing the mangrove ecosystem beyond what it can normally tolerate. And we improved on the design in a few ways. First, we made the slope of the rock revetment shallower, and this allowed it to accumulate even more sediments. And as a result, we actually noticed much higher natural recruitment of mangroves along this revetment than at Pulau Tekong. We also created a entirely new feature, which is a coastal tree belt. So if you look at this diagram, what we actually did was that in this bare patch of land between the sea and the terrestrial rainforest, it's low-lying, and we have been planting coastal trees along this stretch so as to create a natural zonation from the terrestrial rainforest into the coastal forest and then down into mangroves and the mudflats. So not only does this provide additional habitats for biodiversity by restoring the natural zonation, it also creates a buffer low-lying area that can be allowed to flood during extreme sea levels and storm surges, while still keeping the inland portions where more critical infrastructure, for example, footpaths, are well protected. And the kind of species that we planted here were carefully chosen. More than 800 trees and shrubs from 58 different species, of which 4 are actually critically endangered or endangered and part of our species recovery program. So for example, on the right, you can see this bee is now pollinating Ormocarpum cochinchiniensis, which is a tree that was previously thought to be extinct. But after rediscovery on our offshore islands, we have planted it at Kranji Coastal Nature Park. And we heavily involve the community in all these activities. More than 250 participants from a huge variety of nature groups, Friends of Sungei Buloh volunteer network, and even school students participated in this. And there's still ongoing restoration work with the help of volunteers. Okay, now moving on to Pulau Ubin, where starting either end of this year or next year, NParks will be implementing another range of nature-based solutions. So similar to the other sites, Pulau Ubin faces erosion issues along the northern coastline because of shipping traffic. And in the south, there's a different scenario altogether. We have an abandoned aquaculture pond, which is not regenerating, even though it's been unused for many years. So for the northern coastline, what happened is that there's erosion happening along the river mouth where some of the mangrove forests are. And in order to intervene here, what we did was we filled soil under the undercut mangrove banks and then stabilize it with rocks. So you can see on the diagram on the right, underneath the mangrove trees, we put soil in biodegradable bags, and then we protect the entire layer with rocks. But again, these rocks are similar to what we did at Tekong and Kranji. They have gaps in between so that we can have new mangroves that will settle there. At the same time, we also learned from the previous projects that it's important to try and maintain the natural hydrology of the mangroves that are originally there. So what we did was to make sure that little rivulets or little streams of water that naturally exist can still will not be covered up by this new revetment, so that at high tide, there will be natural inundation of the mangroves by seawater. And this is essential for the mangroves to continue being a healthy, functioning ecosystem. Okay, on another part of the northern coastline, it's a different ecosystem altogether. It's a sandy beach with a coastal forest, as well as some cliffs. So the approach then will be very different from what we had to deal with in the past. What NParks did was that we did extensive modeling studies, including an environmental impact study. And we also consulted closely with the Friends of Ubin network of community stakeholders to figure out what the best solution was. Eventually, we arrived on this idea of intertidal headlands, where we actually create these kind of like mini rock revetments to reshape the hydrology of the coastline, as well as some beach nourishment. And this creates a series of crenulated beaches, or like sort of crescent-shaped beaches that advance the eroded shoreline and stabilize it. At the same time, these headlands are designed in a way to have intertidal rock pools integrated into it, so that you can have marine life such as sea stars growing along the rock pools. And we also can plant it up with a number of salt spray tolerant plants, hopefully creating a habitat that can be used by coastal birds. So over in the south, we also face quite a different problem that we hadn't dealt with before. So previously, Pulau Ubin had a number of aquaculture ponds where farmers actually cleared the mangrove forest to farm things like prawns or fish. But subsequently, they were abandoned and disused. And you would think that with time, natural regeneration would allow these ponds to become mangrove again. Unfortunately, because these ponds are very deep, a lot of the mangroves were only able to settle along the edges of the rock buns that define the pond, or in the very shallow areas of the pond. And in the deeper parts, which could go down to as much as 5 meters deep, there was no mangrove growth. So what actually happened was the Restore Ubin Mangrove Network of volunteers proposed to use this method called ecological mangrove restoration. So this is quite different from just planting mangrove trees. The idea is to first create the right environmental conditions so that mangroves can naturally regenerate on their own without humans having to do any planting. So to better understand how we can execute this, NParks worked together with the Geography Department of NUS, as well as the Restore Ubin Mangrove Network, to better survey and understand the site conditions, and eventually arrive on a number of measures. Firstly, to decrease the depth of the pond so that mangroves can now survive without being drowned. And secondly, to improve the overall flow of water or hydrology of these ponds so that there's an adequate supply of mangrove propagules. So propagules are sort of like the the water dispersed seedlings of mangroves that allow new mangrove trees to settle away from their parent. And by ensuring that the water flows are adequate, you can allow mangroves to naturally settle inside these ponds on their own without any planting. And a very big part of our climate resilience efforts involves outreach and education, because in order to fight the impacts of climate change, a whole of society effort is necessary. City in Nature aims very much to also empower the community to take action together with NParks and steward our environment. And these are 4 different programs that you can consider. For example, Community in Nature. This involves different kinds of programs such as guided walks, citizen science, or also just helping out with habitat enhancement works. We have youth at SG Nature, where we actually put together a number of programs and projects that youth can execute so that they can pick up the skills necessary to be active stewards for biodiversity. We have the Garden City Fund, which is a charity that was set up by NParks that provides a platform for both organizations and individuals to contribute monetarily towards different kinds of conservation programs. And finally, we have our own official YouTube channel. Some of you may be watching this right now on our YouTube channel. And if you actually scroll through our catalog, you can find out a lot more about our native biodiversity, as well as different platforms that you can be a part of. So really what we want you guys to take away from today is that you also can play a part in making Singapore climate resilient. NParks has a very large volunteer network, and the kind of volunteers that we have do things ranging from citizen science, data collection, to tree planting, to habitat restoration in schools, and even underwater diving. So if you're interested in joining us on this journey to make Singapore a city in nature, we will really welcome you. And you can find out more about all our various programs and initiatives at these different social media platforms. Thank you everyone for listening. I think we will now be happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Jonathan and Zestin, for the sharing just now. We have a few audience questions, so we will try to take as much as possible. I'm sorry, this is only available for our Zoom audience, the interaction bit. So we will start with the first question. Okay, so this is in regards to, I think, our programs on the 1 million tree movement. So we have an audience member asking, how do we ensure that the trees planted are healthy? And how do we ensure that we minimize danger to the public arising from the trees planted?
Thanks for the question. So I want to assure everyone that NParks takes public safety as a priority in all our greening efforts, And with regards to trees, NParks has a rigorous tree inspection program and maintenance regime that's aligned with the best management practices from the International Society of Arboriculture. And with this, what's involved is we have trained inspectors or certified arborists that conduct regular tree inspections every 6 to 24 months, depending on the location and the size of the tree. And trees that are closer to high areas with high pedestrian or traffic activity are inspected more frequently. But as we increase greening, there will definitely be more trees to look after. And I think that's where this question is coming from. So really to prepare for the future, we've been looking on tapping on more kinds of technology to help us in this effort. So one example that we announced this year is the Remote Tree Measurement System, or RTMS. And this system uses something called LiDAR, LIDAR, which stands for Light Detection and Ranging. So this system essentially is similar to sonar, but instead of using sound waves, it uses lasers. And what it does together with machine learning is it maps the locations of trees and automatically extracts measurement values and details of these different trees along our streetscapes, for example. And these can be automatically uploaded into our tree registry system. And it helps NParks to efficiently obtain an overview of the trees in the area. And so it can help to improve the efficiency of our operational processes in managing a large number of trees that we're planting in our living environment. And of course, all this effort in maintaining these trees actually isn't done alone. We're not doing it alone. We are doing it in partnership with the landscape sector. And so last year, in 2019, we actually launched a 10-year landscape sector transformation plan. And this plan is aimed at helping the sector to digitalize, mechanize, and improve in professionalism as well in being able to execute these various operational roles needed to maintain our large population of trees.
Thanks, Zestin, for sharing the extensive regime in maintaining and ensuring public safety when it comes to planting trees. Okay, we will move on to another question that we got, which is about the nature-based solutions that you had shared. How do these nature-based solutions compare with the traditional engineering solutions that are available?
Okay, maybe I can take this question first. So I think whether we choose to implement a nature-based solution or a traditional engineering solution depends a lot on the site context. So for example, there might be constraints, right, which mean that you can't work with a very soft or even a hybrid nature-based solution just because the environmental conditions there mean that it's not workable. But at the same time, the reason why we think nature-based solutions are very worth considering as much as possible is because they're multifunctional, right? With a traditional engineering solution, you are just trying to solve one main problem, for example, preventing floods. But with a nature-based solution, we want to aim for solutions that also create value for people and biodiversity in creating value for people in the sense of fostering social interaction, creating recreational spaces, and biodiversity by improving the ecosystem, creating more habitats and connectivity. And it's that multifunctional aspect that means that they are worth considering as far as possible. I also don't think we should think of them as an either-or, because in some contexts, some kinds of nature-based solutions are essentially you are improving a traditional engineering solution. So for example, some of the ones I showed earlier, right, such as we green up a concrete waterway, or you implement biodiversity enhancement tiles on the seawall. These are cases where the site context meant that it was necessary to implement a traditional engineering solution, but there are options for adding a layer of nature onto it so that it now has some degree of social value and ecological value. Yeah.
Thanks, Jonathan. We will now move on to another question from the audience. Okay, this is again about the 1 million tree movement. So there are some questions about what kind of tree species are planted under this movement, and whether it is still open for the community to participate and volunteer to plant trees.
Thanks again for the question. So I'll take the second part first. Definitely it's open for the community to volunteer, and we are more than happy to have all hands on deck and being involved. There are many ways to be involved, but do visit the website trees.sg and sign up for our mailing list. You can receive information on upcoming events, and you can sign up for them and plant trees. With regards to the species of trees being planted, it depends on the site, and the most appropriate tree species are chosen. If you happen to join a 1 million trees movement planting event closer to perhaps some of the nature reserves or nature parks, it's very likely that you'll be planting some of these primary forest and secondary forest tree species. For example, dipterocarp trees, which are characteristic of our primary forests here in Singapore. And it's really a wonderful opportunity to see these incredibly beautiful and intricate and rare species as part of our natural heritage up close. And you can also visit them again sometime many years down the road, and you can see how big they grow. So it's a really wonderful opportunity. And it also depends on the different, and as I alluded to, there are different ways to help out. For example, in Sungei Buloh, at the Kranji Coastal Nature Park, which was mentioned by Jonathan, in that habitat restoration area, you can plant more coastal tree species, and some of them are even featured. Some of them are also endangered species listed in the species recovery program. But you can also be involved in actually helping to look after the saplings as well. And we call that sapling protection action. You can involves in, for example, helping out with weeding or mulching these trees, so that to help all the different elements of habitat restoration.
Okay, so I hope you got the answer that definitely there are still spaces and opportunities to volunteer with this movement, and community participation is key to realizing this vision as well. So do keep a lookout in our website, and there will be planting opportunities coming up every month in line with the prevailing safe management measures at that time. Okay, we will take maybe one or two more questions. Okay, so we have a question about projects on freshwater mangroves at the marina. So are there any plans for such projects in the pipeline, or how would it work with the marinas and the mangrove freshwater ecosystems?
Okay, thanks for that question. I think currently NParks doesn't have any plans to do planting of mangroves in freshwater areas, for the main reason that mangroves can grow in freshwater, but they would tend to be outcompeted by other plants because they grow a lot slower. Actually, the only reason that mangroves do so well in saltwater is because they are so tough that all the other plants can't grow there. And as a result, even though they're slow growing, they do quite well. But that said, NParks is constantly working with government agencies to look for opportunities to do freshwater ecosystem enhancement. For example, by planting freshwater plants. Also creative ideas like the floating wetland that you saw at Sengkang. We've done something similar at Pulau Ubin. So not specifically freshwater mangroves, but yes, we are constantly looking for ways to better integrate ecology and biodiversity into our freshwater bodies. Yeah.
Thanks for that information, Jonathan. I think we will just have time for one last question, which had come in earlier. It's a more broad-based question on how we as the community, as individuals, can contribute to this climate resilience journey that you had shared so extensively about.
Maybe I'll take this one first. We mentioned a lot about the 1 million trees movement, and I think definitely want to emphasize that again, that I think there are many benefits that trees bring, especially to enhancing climate resilience. So being involved in planting can be a great way, and also be involved in the entire habitat restoration process as well through the 1 million trees movement. And there are associated with that, there are also different ways you can also be sharing it with your family and friends on the importance of greening and being involved in that way. I think some of the other things that were shown in our slides earlier in community engagement, one more would be being involved in citizen science programs. So climate impact can potentially impact our ecosystems, and the resilience of our ecosystems also is related to climate resilience. So one of the ways that you can help out therefore is through monitoring our biodiversity. And so we have a range of different programs, biodiversity watch programs, for example, Garden Bird Watch and Butterfly Watch that you can take part in and sign up for. During Festival Biodiversity, also depending on safe management measures, there might also be BioBlitz events where you can also participate and help as a citizen scientist.
Okay, thanks, Zestin. To our Zoom audience, we have actually shared some links on the information and some volunteering opportunities as well. So do keep a lookout. So there are existing programs that you can volunteer with, participate, that runs year round. And that will provide you with some chances on maybe the greater understanding of our biodiversity, which is also keen as we are moving to a city in nature. So I would like to thank the speakers for so patiently taking all the audience questions and also doing the sharing on this slightly technical topic today. If this has gotten you interested to know more about our native biodiversity, flora and fauna, we do have a lot more of such talks in our YouTube channel, which was organized last year as part of the Festival of Biodiversity and NParks Spotlight series. So do visit our YouTube channel and then you can watch it at your leisure time. Again, as I mentioned, today will be the final day of Festival of Biodiversity. Do visit our website to find more details about what activities are going on. If you happen to be around Singapore Botanic Gardens, do drop by and you can view the panels, read more information, even about the climate resilience topic that was shared today, and also meet the other nature groups and do activities at the Festival of Biodiversity. We have come to the end of today's session. We would really like to hear your feedback on how you enjoyed the session and if there is anything else you would like to see in future. And we will try to meet you really soon, either in person or online in other similar webinars. Thanks for tuning in on a Sunday afternoon to this session. And I hope you all have a great weekend ahead. Thank you so much.